Hi guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Frame. This week, after I shared a particular image on Instagram, there were a couple of requests to share the story behind this actual image. And also, I was quite intrigued to see that this was, it was a very popular image. It got a lot of likes and a lot of traction, which I wasn't quite expecting. It was an incredible moment, and for me, the experiences behind the actual image were more powerful than the image itself. But it seems as though perhaps some of that has carried through into the actual image. So I wanted to share both the experience behind this as well as some of the editing and the usual stuff that we cover in the Behind the Frame series. So this is the series of images that we're going to be working through today. It's of a particular bull known as Spike. This is the raw file, so there's a bit of tweaking and stuff which needs to be done here. But more importantly, the experience and moments leading up to this. So this was taken in Mana Pools. This is on the Zambezi River. The area that you're seeing where Spike is actually drinking is a little bit of an overflow, and the river was quite high at this stage. This is right out in front of camp. Most guests were having a bit of an afternoon siesta when this guy started to drink and splash on the main bank before he actually crossed over a channel and went to this particular point. So I ran around and kind of rallied up the troops, got the guests up, and we went to go and photograph him. And once he had crossed onto this island, we decided to follow suit, and we crossed over through a channel, probably nothing more than kind of just a little bit more than knee high, but still wading through the water in the Zambezi River, getting to a little sandy island, walking up and approaching this very relaxed and well-known bull in the area was quite special. And then photographing him and spending probably a good half an hour with him as he was drinking. He then eventually crossed over this little channel in front of us and came onto the island that we were on at this stage. And it was just an incredible experience. And one of the most important things for me when we're out on safari is to create these kind of experiences. We had a little swim in the same river a couple of days later when the temperature reached more than 40 degrees. So, it's those little things which often we're not able to convey in an image or in a trip report, which just make a safari, a photographic safari, that much more special. So this is a great image and a great memory for me and for the guests as well. And moving on to the kind of the specifics of the image, and these, I've taken this whole series here, but if we just make this a little bit larger and looking at these thumbnails, why I've chosen this one here with the flag is if you have a look here, there's no water, kind of a bit of a splash going on through all of this. But for me, I liked the detail on this particular splash. And so this was the image that I've chosen to kind of work through with us. You can see here the splash diminishes a little bit and it just becomes more about the Ellie. So taking this into the develop module and having a look at some of the settings here, you can see 5,000 of a second, f3.2, ISO 250. This was taken with a 300mm f2.8 lens. And that's why we've been able to achieve such a great shallow depth of field here in the foreground. Getting down nice and low and including the foreground in your image, especially when shooting with a shallow depth of field, helps lead your eye through. So remember, our eye is drawn to the sharpest, brightest, and points with greatest contrast. So this is all soft and blurred in the foreground leading up to him, and then all of a sudden, bang, we have sharp, clear detail. The contrast of the water against the body in shadow draws your eye there, as well as the tusk against these trees in the background, and then all of a sudden that depth of field drops off again. So very important to use depth of field with the storytelling, and especially in a place like Mana Pools where you're able to get off on foot. Getting down low to help you tell that story is vitally important. So I encourage everyone to lay down as low as they could on the ground here. Initially we got there and a lot of the guests were shooting with their tripods and seated, but getting down nice and low really made the difference here, and it allowed you to include some of this foreground. There was something else I was going to say. Oh yes, so f2.8 lens, why shoot at f3.2 or possibly f4? Generally they say that each lens has a sweet spot. Now if you think about an aperture and an opening at f2.8, this is a massive opening. If you just stop down slightly more than that, the light that comes through there starts to fall in a slightly more condensed fashion onto the sensor. So if you think about f16, tiny little pinprick of light coming through the aperture, stopping all the way down, yet all of that scene, a lot of depth, falls in a columnated and focused manner. So at f2.8, you may still have a little bit of detail getting lost on the edges there, slightly soft. And so if you stop in just a little bit more and just concentrate those beams of light falling in a condensed fashion, it tends to be a little bit sharper. So that's why I went for 3.2. Could have gone for f4 as well, but as you'll see, if we zoom in all the way onto this, there's absolutely no issue with detail on here. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is that you will notice that this elephant has a collar. And now, for the context in minor pools, a lot of the larger bulls have been fitted with these collars, less from a monitoring and research purpose, but more from a protection purpose. So minor pools is flanked by consumptive utilization areas where there is hunting. And so in order to ensure that these elephants don't become trophies on someone's wall, they've put collars around them to protect them. And so for me, you know, it's very easy to go and remove that little collar over there. It's not a difficult thing to do at all, but it's part of the narrative. And unfortunately, that is the reality that we face these days. Things are changing a lot in the Zambezi Valley with new concessions and new areas coming online to protect these animals. But for now, this guy has a collar. Why would we want to take it off? Right, let's have a look at some of the editing. So the first thing is, yes, the horizon is skew. So I'm going to do this visually because we've got a bit of a tricky one here. We've got what is dead straight, but then there's also a kind of curve on the river leading through. So I'm going to look at it from just purely from a visual perspective, and that would straighten that whole setup up. Now, the image that I posted on Instagram was actually a portrait orientation. I'm just going to correct this slightly. It doesn't, when I just popped it back in there, it didn't quite look straight. I think we're probably somewhere around there. That looks a bit better. All right, so I can hit X, and that's going to change the orientation. And I did a portrait orientation of this. And so that emphasizes the depth and the kind of lead into this. I see this brown patch over here as a slightly distracting element. So I'm going to clean that out and maybe just move this over that way and work with something along those lines, just a little bit more. You'll see again that I'm a fan of rather cropping out distracting elements than having to use brushes and spot removals and that sort of thing. Let's see if we can include a little bit more of that reflection in there. Hell, why not include the whole reflection? So let's work it something like that. So there's a lot of depth to the scene. We've got this soft vegetation in the foreground, the reflection in the water leading all the way up to our actual elephant. Then from a basic processing point of view, if we have a look at some of the settings on this one, I'm just going to bring them up again for us. Under by 1/3, so this was bright light, not very dark shadows. This was kind of mid-afternoon, so this light was starting to get a little bit softer. Histogram is fairly well stretched out. All I'm going to do is just lift up those whites a little bit. I'm going to come down saturation up to a value of 4 and lift the vibrance a touch. Tone curve, we're going to come in here, a little bit of contrast onto the lights. The shadows and the darks I'm not too concerned about at all. There's no real need for us to get involved there. A little handy trick and something that we can do is we've got a linear kind of adjustment through here. So if we have a look at something along these lines, if we want to try and enhance this shallow depth of field and this lead in towards our subject, very easy. So a lot of people when using this graduated filter feel that they have to start right at the edge of the frame and drag it up. You don't have to. You can bleed the effect from 100% here to 50% and then fades to 0 over there. And so all we're going to do in this part is we're just going to drop the clarity just a little bit. And the dehaze filter sometimes helps to just soften that up a little bit more as well. Why not throw a localized adjustment onto our LE? So again, at a flow of 40. So we're just slowly going to start building up the effect. Have a look at the overlay here. Remember that as I brush along, the more I concentrate in one particular area, the more of the effect is going to be applied. So we're just going to kind of cover our LE. And in this particular area, all we want to do now is apply some clarity. And maybe just a hint of exposure on there. So it's very, very subtle. We'll switch that off. You can see it's just a little bit of an adjustment on there. Our final kind of setup here, sharpening, we're going to mask out. Remember, everything that is white is going to be what is going to be sharpened. And so we've intentionally chosen a very shallow depth of field on this And so I'm comfortable to mask out to somewhere around here. Let's take it to 80 just for fun. And we can then increase the amount. Now we can have a look here. Remember, this is our one-to-one preview. If you want to kind of change where this is in the frame, you can place this little marker anywhere and then base your adjustments on there. So let's have a look if we can pick up any detail and changes here. So this is before without the sharpening. Now look at how soft that little patch of the water is. Once we apply the sharpening, it really does pop. So again, not a hell of a lot that has been done to this image, but let's just have a look at the before and after. So before and after. Again, all we've done is just dialed up the elements that we have in the frame, remembering that every single raw image is in need of a little bit of saturation, a little bit of sharpening, and a touch of contrast. So that's pretty much it. For me, this image would work quite well as well in a landscape orientation, and I would include this patch of water hyacinth that's kind of floating down in the foreground here. And I'd probably extend it out to somewhere around there, just looking at rule of thirds and where we place our subject, and then also removing this little patch of brown in the foreground here. If we were to go and do this, I think that this guy might be a little bit too distracting. So I would leave us somewhere like that. And with that being a slightly different storytelling image, showing a little bit more the sense of space and scale that we have. But again, what makes this image is the fact that the settings were correct and it was captured in camera, the fact that we were able to get down nice and low, and then the content with the water, the little bit of a splash, beautiful big tusker on the Zambezi, and just, you know, just a magic scene all around. I hope you guys have learned and have enjoyed this episode of Behind the Frame. Be back next week with another image for you all. If you have any questions, drop me a line on andrew@wildeye.co.za or drop me a comment on the blog post or on the YouTube channel. Cheers.